If I were to say it's a distinct honor and privilege to introduce our next speaker, it would be a huge understatement. This young lady is made of iron. She's been our attorney. She orphaned us to become a member of Congress. And I'm about to introduce Congresswoman Harriet Hageman. She represents the great state of Wyoming, and she attended Casper College, earned her livestock judging scholarship. She's been a litigator for 34 years. I'm not going to read your bio. Congresswoman Harriet Hageman is dedicated to ensuring that the legislative branch, and only the legislative branch of government, passes the laws. And all of the federal agencies' responsibility is to carry out those laws and nothing more. And with that, let me introduce our wonderful congressional member from Wyoming, Harriet Hageman. Thank you.
It is so wonderful to be here again. I don't know how many years I've been here, Bill. Is this my third or fourth year? Maybe third? I don't know. It's great to be back. It's so wonderful to see so many old friends and make some new ones. I'm here today to kind of report on what's been going on in Congress, and also just to address some philosophical issues that I think it's important for us to keep in mind as we fight the battles that are before us. One of the things that always amazes me is what an incredible job that Bill and his team do in putting on this convention, bringing people from across the Midwest and the West together to talk about the issues facing your industry and what we need to do to be pushing back against the bad policies coming out of not only Washington, D.C., but some of our states as well. Those of you in this room are truly the epitome of the American spirit. And historically great changes in our nation haven't happened as the result of a massive popular movement, but instead by a few people who've been committed to a cause, working tirelessly to do what needs to be done, risking their livelihoods, their reputation, and their sacred honor. Over the years, I have watched as Bill and his team have continued to rally the troops in order to protect the cattle industry, while also striving to improve the market and economic conditions so that you can thrive in the industry that is your calling. Through many David versus Goliath fights, you continue to keep your eye on the target to fight for the independent U.S. cattle producer. And I want to thank each and every one of you for staying in that battle. I really do love this year's theme of the convention, which is the American spirit. And boy, could we use more of that today. I've seen the American spirit lived out by many in this room who I know personally, and that's why groups like this are ones that will eventually save this country. The American spirit means admitting that there is absolute truth and having a backbone to speak it. The American spirit is working to create your own opportunity, not waiting for a handout or for someone else to do what needs to be done. The American spirit is being independent and understanding that our rights come from God, not the government, and as a result, the government cannot take them away. The American spirit is less dependence on begging and more power in bargaining, and thinking for yourself, putting the needs of others before your own, and having the satisfaction of a job well done. The American spirit is working for something bigger than you. Everyone used to understand the American spirit, and to be honest, the world would be a better place if more people did so now. Yet as we look around, I think that we all notice that there have been some pretty dramatic changes in this country and in the world over the last couple of decades. Things have changed pretty dramatically in a relatively short period of time. And it seems like it was just yesterday when we understood that conservation meant caring for the land, not locking it up into perpetuity or leasing it for non-use to who knows what foreign entities. When we admitted that CO2 is plant food and we need it for a healthy, green, lush climate that can produce enough food to feed the world. when meat came from livestock, not laboratories, and when we applauded the fact that our nation had made such incredible and awe-inspiring industrial advances that we could take reliable electricity for granted by the work of our friends in the fossil fuel industry, rather than living in the Stone Age and being reliant on harnessing the power of the sun and the wind. I refer to the current administration as trying to impose government-imposed wretchedness, and it seems as though every policy that they pursue is exactly that. And it also seems like just yesterday we could offer people Bud Light at the branding without unwittingly promoting some radical ideology. Long before I took office as Wyoming's lone congressional representative, I had been working for many of the priorities of this organization. I fought to be able to treat wolves as predators so that we could control them and limit their geographic range in Wyoming. I fought the EPA when they tried to claim that an irrigation ditch was a navigable water of the United States and attempted to impose almost $65 million in fines against my client for cleaning out such irrigation ditch. I fought for private property rights and to bolster the voice of the independent cattle producers and to keep each of you free of unlawful mandates. Now, you know this, but sometimes the folks in Wyoming need to be reminded of it. Under our Constitution, as Bill said, it is for Congress to be making the law, not unelected bureaucrats, including those in the USDA and APHIS and people out of Washington, D.C., who want to tell you how to run your operations. It sounds simple, right? But there's often not a great deal of respect for the Constitution among the agencies and federal bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. So despite the fact that we have been fighting against the RFID mandate for the last 4 years, it is in the relentless drive to control how you raise your livestock that USDA is again still trying to implement an EID program, a program that would have an enormous impact on your livestock operations, with non-compliance resulting in the denial of access to interstate markets. We also know that one of the primary purposes of the RFID mandate is to allow USDA bureaucrats and the big four packers to dictate how you run your operations. The moment that they succeed in imposing an EID mandate, I can assure you that you will see many more requirements coming down the road in terms of how you manage your water resources, in terms of the height that you have to have for the lowest rung on your fence, mandated vegetation heights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, Tracy Hunt, and I don't know if he's here today, but he recently sent me an email showing all of the paperwork that cattle producers in Ireland must now file to stay in compliance with their RFID mandate that went into effect. And it is pages and pages and pages of documents. The USDA estimates that it would cost $26.1 million to your industry to enforce an RFID mandate. And the reality is that doesn't even come close to touching the actual cost of what you will end up paying. I doubt that that will even cover the compliance costs associated with complying with this new requirement. Make no mistake, the RFID is the crown jewel in the USDA and the packers' desire to further vertically integrate the cattle industry. Congress, however, has never passed legislation requiring you to use RFID ear tags. So to combat what the USDA is doing, I have offered an amendment to the USDA appropriations bill that they cannot use any funds to implement their RFID mandate if they actually adopt one. I have been working with Thomas Massey to make sure that the rule that comes out of the Rules Committee will make it so that we can defund this program in the with the USDA. Now, I'm not opposed to cattle ranchers using EID. I'm not opposed to cattle ranchers making a lot of their own decisions about how they run their operations. That's the point. But I am opposed to the mandates associated with it. In the heat of fighting this particular mandate coming out of DC, I'm reminded of those who have strayed from the American spirit. Some organizations with whom I'd like to think we are generally aligned have come out against my amendment. That makes no sense to me. but I'm in fact speaking about the American Farm Bureau Federation, an organization with which we are usually good friends. On this issue, their attitude is that the USDA is going to adopt and implement an RFID anyway, so we may as well just get some money for compliance with it. It is this attitude and approach, always conceding to government authority and asking for cash in exchange, that has put us squarely in the situation that we're in right now. Comply or the agencies will destroy you. That's the key. This is the attitude that has allowed these agencies to take more and more power while forcing our producers, our cattlemen, our oil and gas operators, our coal miners, our truckers, to do what the government says. And every single time that we take this approach, we lose. The amount of money the government gives to us as their carrot is never enough for compliance, and it always, and I mean always, results in them taking more power, more control, more of your hard-earned money, and more of our very souls. We have to fight back. I, for one, will not stand by while bad actors and power-hungry bureaucrats who have never been more than 25 miles from Washington, D.C., use their authority in the United States Department of Agriculture to make production agriculture a thing of the past and ruin our industry. We must stand in resolve and stop this rule from being implemented. Find out who your friends are in the industry and fight against the rest. They don't have your best interests at heart. Dying by 1,000 cuts is still death. Fight back not only against those who seek to inflict them, but those who think that it's we who should tolerate them. Predation is another battle facing our ag industry. In Wyoming, grizzly bears are of grave concern to cattle and other producers, as well as to our hunting and outfitting industries. So I've introduced a bill to delist them from the endangered species list. The Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem grizzly bear met its recovery goal of 500 bears over 20 years ago, but environmental activists and bureaucratic intervention have prevented its delisting, despite the fact that even the Fish and Wildlife Service knows that Wyoming's bear management plan meets all of the Endangered Species Act requirements. Wyoming has spent over $59 million recovering the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem grizzly bear, and we've done a damn good job. As a result, the bear population has exploded, both in number and in geographic coverage. We now have over 1,100 grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone area, with the Fish and Wildlife Service itself admitting that Yellowstone is saturated at capacity and cannot hold any additional bears. The longer we wait to address the grizzly population and allow Wyoming to manage the bear pursuant to our management plan, the greater the threats to humans and other species within the ecosystem. Delisting the grizzly bear is necessary to ensure that other species do not experience significant population decline. While the grizzly bear is not yet a threat to everyone in this room, at the moment the Endangered Species Act is. After 50 years, the intent of the ESA has been largely lost. The ESA is now often used as a mechanism by which environmental groups have weaponized the federal government and courts to impose restrictions on the use of private property and limit our ability to use our energy and water resources, while these groups also make massive amounts of money from the federal government through subsidies, NGO payments, and sue and settle actions. As implemented by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and is enforced by our activist courts, success is not in recovering a legitimately threatened or endangered species, but in ensuring that a recovered species, no matter how robust in number or geographic range and health, is never, ever delisted. Critical habitat designations under the ESA are designed to cover large areas of land so that the federal government and environmental groups can control ever-expanding swaths of property and water. In short, it's just nothing but a land grab. The Endangered Species Act needs serious reform, and that's why I have joined the ESA working group in Congress. The goal of the working group is to publish a series of policy recommendations to reform the ESA to the benefit of the American people and species conservation. Another landmark challenging our ag industry is that of country of origin labeling. This is an issue on which I don't think there are better experts to speak to, and no organization which has dedicated as much time as RCAF USA. 2 weeks ago, I introduced the Country of Origin Labeling Enforcement Act of 2023. The bill, which to my surprise has both Democrat and Republican support, seeks to prohibit beef retailers from designating foreign beef as an American-made product by defining U.S.-produced beef as coming from animals exclusively born, raised, slaughtered, and packaged in the United States. But we didn't stop there. The bill hits processors who do not comply with a $5,000 per pound fine of beef illegally labeled as made in the USA. And as if we needed one more battle to fight, Joe Biden's 30 by 30 initiative, which I was asked about today, deceivingly named the America the Beautiful Plan, is a gruesome land grab. The president says the call to action is to work together to conserve, connect, and restore 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. Like I said in my remarks last year, the 30 by 30 plan is nothing more than a means to control your property and ultimately to control you. Many of my colleagues understand this, and we are working to stop it at every single turn. The fact is that there is so much that is going on, and there are so many issues that are facing us right now, but there are also some reasons to remain hopeful. And having been in Congress now for 7 months, I can tell you that I am more optimistic than perhaps you would expect me to be. And the reason that I am is that there are a lot of people back in Washington, D.C. who are just like me. They see what the issues are, they want to fight them, they want to work together to resolve the challenges that we're facing. One of the things that happens when you have a crisis is that people truly do come together to try to address it. And I don't know that I've ever seen a time in my country's history, at least since I've been alive, where we have faced the multiple crises that we do on the multiple fronts that we have. But calf prices remain strong, as do the futures supporting them. We've had record-breaking moisture across the region, and there's an abundance of hay everywhere you look. My brother Hugh, who farms and ranches near Fort Laramie, Wyoming, reported a new record at the Hageman Ranch this year. On July 17th, they baled 266 big round bales in one day. On one field of 70 acres, they produced 309 big bales this year, having produced only 70 bales last year. And that is a change to celebrate. Some more good news is that we have a number of good people finally in Congress who understand and are fighting these issues. The resounding reason to remain hopeful is that we have in this room people who are engaged on the issues with a plan of action to take them head on and the resiliency embedded in the American spirit to get the job done. Standing in front of you today, I am reminded of why I was called to public service. You are the men and women who make this country go, and your government should not be a hindrance as you work to support your families and to feed and nourish the people of this nation. It is an honor to serve in the House of Representatives and take on these fights on your behalf. Thank you again for having me here today and for all you are doing for the cattle industry. I support you fully and will continue to fight for you in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Thank you. Do we want to take some questions? I'd be happy to take questions. Just don't make them hard. There's one right back here.
I was just wondering, since their USDA is putting out the $20 billion for these conservation programs, but what they're also trying to do is to put all these rules in the farm program stuff so that you have to they tell you what you're gonna grow. They tell you that you have to reduce your emissions for the livestock, and if you don't, then you're gonna, I'm pretty sure you'll get fined or something on that order. And then you have to, all your practices have to improve our climate problems that they call problems. And the same thing goes there, that they're gonna, basically, if you get into those conservation programs now with those words in the farm bill, then the government's gonna take over your place and tell you what to do.
So what I need you to do is identify for me in the Farm Bill where those are specifically stated. But what I will also say is that, yes, I worry very much about the various programs that have been put forward by the USDA. I think that it is something that is of grave concern, and as I indicated in my remarks, that's really what they've done over the years, is they've used the carrot of money to turn around and require operational changes. And that's why I believe that with the EID requirement, it is the one mechanism by which they can try to enforce their BQA requirements, their beef quality assurance requirements, which is the, 58 or 60 point checklist that they want all of our ranchers to adopt in their operations. The reason that we talk about vertical integration associated with EID is it's going to be so cost prohibitive to comply with the rules that it's only the really big ranches and the packers that are going to be able to afford compliance. It's another form of agency capture where the big businesses are the ones that are dictating the massive types of regulatory requirements in order to put the independents and the smaller guys out of business. We've seen this coming for a long, long time, and it's why it's incredibly important that we elect people who understand these issues so that we can push back against them. As I've indicated, I'm working with Thomas Massey to try to stop the EID requirement at this point. We will identify others as well to try to defund, to make sure that these agencies can't do exactly what you're talking about. There are other questions? Right here.
You were talking about how there's going to be $5,000 per pound for any beef that's mislabeled. What are you? How do you know what is mislabeled? How are you going to keep everything in line?
Well, there's going to have to be the continued inspection, but it's exactly the same kind of program that we've been trying to put in place for a long time, which is the country of origin labeling and requiring that we follow the food chain through. There's going to have to be that kind of monitoring to be able to identify what is not actually American-produced beef.
So does that mean every meat packer in the United States is going to have somebody watching everything they do, making sure that it's labeled correctly?
Well, that's what they're gonna have to find a way to comply with that. But Cool was in place before, and it was repealed. Mm-hmm. But we had it in place before, and it's one of the reasons why the packers don't want it. The packers don't want the country of origin labeling, because they want to be able to say that anything that is slaughtered in the United States is made in America. But we're trying to protect the industry so that we're not importing massive amounts of livestock from other countries. And I believe also, in fact, I know for a fact that the consumers want to know where their meat comes from and are willing to pay more for American-produced beef.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Yeah.
All right.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Harriet, this is Bill Cluck, and
Hi,
I'm
Bill.
probably one of the only people in this room that was disappointed when you ran for the legislature. But you were talking about representing us on our property tax case, and I was very hopeful that you would do it. But I'm very glad you're in the legislature, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
The question I have, I used to live in Montana, and when the government wiped out the CMR from any grazing, it put me out of business. And and there's been different movements to try to do this, but I would love to see the federal lands turned over to the states or the allotment owners, whatever you want to call it. So.
There is an organization that has been working on that for quite some time, Ken Ivory's organization out of Utah, and I believe that there are some things that might be going forward in that regard relatively soon. So I don't know the exact status of that, But we also have to have good governors and people in the states who are willing to manage these properties correctly as well.
Staten Weldon, Crero, Texas. You stated that the American Farm Bureau was all for the RFID tags. You also mentioned country of origin labeling, and I'm embarrassed to say I haven't kept up with it, but how is the American Farm Bureau activities towards country of origin labeling on the national scale?
My understanding is that they support it. As far as the American Farm Bureau, the position that they've taken on my amendment to defund the USDA's effort to enforce the RFID mandate is that, well, they're going to do it anyway, so we just as well get the money out of it. But as I've indicated, the money never compensates you for the costs associated with the new regulations. In 2013, when the USDA tried this the first time to force an RFID mandate, in the 2013 regulation, they actually estimated the cost of a full RFID across the country. And according to the USDA 10 years ago, the cost of a full mandatory RFID would be $2 billion. So when they've come back with their number of $26.1 million 10 years later, it doesn't include all of the equipment and things associated with it. You're still going to have to keep track of the numbers. The other thing that they're trying to fudge is traceability doesn't do you any good unless you know where the animal originated from. The original proposal was that you were going to have to register your ranch with the federal government and have a premises identification number. Obviously, that raised a lot of privacy concerns, and people didn't want to register their ranches with the federal government. It's none of their damn business. So they knew that that was going to be a hard sell. So this time they say, oh, no, you don't have to have a PIN. You don't have to have a premises identification number. Well, then what good is the traceability? And when you start looking at the point of traceability being so that they allegedly can quickly trace a diseased animal and know who they've been in contact with, the only way that kind of a system works is with a PIN. And that's why you have to keep all these numbers. And again, I'll encourage you, if Tracy is here or he shows up at some point, you can ask him about all of the requirements coming out of Ireland, but you have to trace every head of live livestock. You have to trace every head of livestock that dies, report that to the federal government so that they can trace every single head of livestock that you manage. So with the American Farm Bureau, I think if they had their druthers, there wouldn't be any ID, but their view is if they're going to do it anyway, let's get the cash. I will tell you that the Wyoming Farm Bureau does not agree with that. The Wyoming Farm Bureau agrees with me and agrees with you. They don't want a mandatory EID requirement. So I think that from a national standpoint, sometimes these organizations view things a little bit differently than the people on the ground.
Harriet,
Right back here.
we met briefly in Cody, Wyoming. So my name's AJ Richards. We're headed back to Utah actually, but ran a small USDA meat plant in Cody for a little over a year, and I've been working on a software to connect consumers directly with producers. So as you said, there's many patriots in this country that want to shake the hand of their producer because they know if they know you, they'll have access to food. So one of the things we're working on is the ability for producers to come to a packing house. We're working on a plant down in Richfield, Utah, that will be designed entirely for the purpose of connecting consumers directly with producers and then putting a QR code so they can meet your family. I've seen a tremendous amount of growth in that desire to know the rancher. That's what COVID did for us. It did a lot of terrible things, but it woke people up in this country to know that they need to know who those food producers in our country are. So this country of origin labeling is crucial, as I think we all know, to be able to put and impose a fine. So this imports of all this foreign beef, they're talking about bringing Paraguayan beef in now when farmers and ranchers are having a hard time keeping food on their own tables and keeping their ranch. So there's a massive shift for consumers. They want to know you, the producers, if you want to get out there. That's what we're seeing happen from our angle.
I think so too. And I appreciate that and appreciate the work that you're doing in that regard. Thank you. I think that that's actually going to be a key to the future of the beef industry, is being able to have that direct access. I know that people I talk to If we didn't have freezers and refrigerators that were this big in Washington, D.C., I think that they would much rather be able to have access to the kind of products that you produce directly. I believe there's one over here.
Yeah. Thank you, Representative Hageman. Mike Schultz. The deal is cool. You know, I chair the cool committee, so we're really with you. We appreciate your stand on that. I want to shift gears a little bit. Where will you be in support with the OFF Act for the checkoff reform bill?
Tell me more about it.
Dale, it's basically to readdress where the money's going, basically in the hands of NCBA, that we get it out of the lobbying groups. We're not wanting to go to the voluntary labeling issue. That's been a concern. Somebody said, well, go to voluntary, and I agree with that. If this doesn't work and we can't get reforms, we ought to maybe then pursue that. But right now, we have to get the hands out of the thieves.
I agree with you on that, and I think that that's been a long time in the coming. I think there have been concerns more concerns in some states rather than others related to where the money is going and who is controlling it and how the entire program has been operated. I also question, we keep questioning where the money is going. We all remember Beef is What's for Dinner program. Haven't seen that for a while, but I think that these programs, almost every one of these programs over time need to be reevaluated, reassessed, and determine what are better ways to do it. So I'm in support of reform that makes sense for the industry.
Thank you. We'll probably be there in September. Hopefully, we'll be back in your office. Good
Okay.
to see you. Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I have one right here.
Hi, Harriet. When the EPA was created several decades back, it had been always acknowledged that CO2 was not a pollutant. It took the intervention of the U.S. Supreme Court to all of a sudden declare it as a pollutant that the EPA could regulate. Is there any movement to get that back to where it belongs, to where the EPA and the U.S. government can't regulate CO2 emissions?
The endangerment finding hurt us in that regard, and the United States Supreme Court was absolutely wrong when they issued that ruling. What I will say is that there are two cases that have recently been issued by the United States Supremes that I think demonstrate that they're looking more closely at what the authorization of what the EPA is. The first one was West Virginia versus EPA, issued in June of 2022, and then the Sackett decision this year. In both of those cases, they severely constrained what the EPA could do in terms of the Air Quality Act and what the EPA could do in terms of the Water Quality Act. So I actually am optimistic that those two decisions are not just going to be limited to the EPA. I think that both of those decisions made agencies across the entire spectrum nervous about what their ultimate authority was. I've said it a couple times here. I do not believe the USDA at this point has been authorized by Congress to impose something such as mandatory RFID requirements against our cattle and bison industries. And I say that because that is not what they were created to do. I don't believe that the USDA has the legal authority to withhold school lunch money if schools don't adopt radical gender ideology. I think that is way outside of what the USDA was created to do. I think if that lawsuit's filed, they will lose. So I have been talking to a lot of people over the last couple of months in different industries, different groups, different challenges, saying, go back to the authorizing language, go back to what it is that created this agency, what their authorization is, and force them to stay within that lane. And so I do think that we're going to someday get back to common sense as to what CO2 is, because we're going to have to, number one. But I think that the court has not just signaled but made very clear that the EPA does not have the authority under the Clean Air Act to impose the kind of draconian restrictions that they were attempting to do. So there's some very good news in that regard. We just have to keep fighting those battles and making sure that the courts are similar, other courts are similarly constraining what these agencies do. Right over here.
One more. Thank you for everything you do. Sincerely, thank you.
Thank you.
So my name is Dave Wright, and I did 8 years on the Nebraska Beef Council, and 6 years on the Cattlemen's Beef Board. So check off is what for dinner. I can tell you all the corruption, but let's go beside that. Country of origin labeling. If you remember, Canada and Mexico took us to the WTO. NCBA signed on as an amicus brief to follow that. My last year at the checkoff, I was on international markets, and we had a guy from Canada criticizing country of origin labeling. And I pointed out to him that he in Canada is discriminating our beef against his. And he said, no way. And I said, yes, you are, because you have an animal ID system to which China made you have, so you can send beef to China. So you have to discriminate against us if you're going to sell in China. And he said, no. And he just argued that that wasn't, there's a difference. So when you get to talking about country of origin labeling, you can point that out. But as well, when we send beef overseas, we label it all as U.S. product. And the United States government, for every dollar checkoff they get $1 in tax money to match that, to promote U.S. beef overseas. That's another thing.
Okay.
But the thing I would like to address with you is, have you heard of a hard-boned discount?
A what discount?
Hard-boned discount? So it's about the age of the animal.
Okay.
When they get to be like 24 months old, they discount you because the bones are hard and they're starting to ossify. We started feeding our way-up cows 3 years ago to get them, white fat so you get a better market for them. I had 10 cows go choice. Choice. I said, where are they going? Applebee's. So wait a minute. They're hard-boned and they went choice. Are you telling people in Applebee's they were hard-boned? Oh no, choice is choice. Prime is prime. Do you see what I'm getting at? There's an arbitrary discount tied in there, and not only does it decrease the value of the animal because of its age, it also forces a narrow window of when you can sell those cattle.
So who imposes this?
The packers.
The packers do.
Right. So with that narrow window, we used
Do
to have.
all of the packers?
Has anybody never heard of not getting a hard-bone discount? USDA. USDA. So here's my point. Back in the 70s, we had the highest cattle herd ever. We had 2-year-old yearlings. We had yearlings. We had calves. That allowed us as producers to limit the supply going to market if the price wasn't good enough. We'd just make yearlings out of them. If it still wasn't good enough, we'd just make 2-year-olds out of them. That forced the packer to bid.
Yeah.
But once you narrow that window up to 24 months, he's got us now. We cannot.
So I believe,
That's my point.
I believe that there's going to be a presentation today on antitrust, the antitrust issues. That seems to me that is potentially stepping into that arena, and maybe we ought to be asking those questions of whether that's another way to get at this, because that's another form of the agency capture I'm talking about, and them conspiring to restrict what they have to do in terms of paying our producers for an arbitrary reason. So I think that's a good question to ask. So again, yes, right over here. Well, I think that's why this organization exists. I think those are important issues, but I will say to Bill, at some point, if there's something that comes out of here that we ought to be considering legislatively, bring it to me. Bring it to me and help me to put it together so that I can introduce something. I'm happy to do that. So again, thank you for everything.